dark and rainy night, a young woman dressed in black mourning clothes got caught in the rain near the entrance of Aoyama Cemetery and hailed a taxi. She had her coat pulled over her head to keep herself dry, as she didn't have an umbrella. The taxi driver couldn't get a good look at her face. He assumed she was visiting the family grave. In a sad voice, she asked to be taken to an address in an uptown neighborhood. Upon arrival, she said she just wanted to linger a few minutes. The driver couldn't see anything but the silhouette of a young woman staring out the taxi window. After idling in silence for about 5 minutes, the girl asked to go to another address. When the driver arrived at a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, he turned around to collect his fare, but the woman was gone. Only a puddle of rainwater remained where she'd been sitting. Perplexed, the driver rang the doorbell and explained his situation to the owner of the house. Without asking the cost, the owner of the house handed him the exact change. The taxi money was already prepared on a small table beside the door. The man apologized for the inconvenience and said the passenger was his daughter. One rainy night, she was killed by a car while crossing the street on her way to see her boyfriend. Although they buried her in the family graveyard at Aoyama Cemetery, for the past 5 years, whenever it rained, the dead daughter hailed a taxi to visit her fiancé's apartment and then her family home. The Tale of Oiwa. Oiwa was a stunningly beautiful young woman who was married to the samurai Emon, a petty man who only loved her for her good looks. Another woman, Ome, was madly in love with Emon, and out of jealous rage she tricked Oiwa into using a cream that was laced with poison. It disfigured Oiwa's face, causing one of her eyes to droop and her hair to fall out, without her even noticing. Disgusted with her new appearance, Emon wished to divorce Oiwa and marry Ome. The despicable samurai hired his friend Takuretsu to rape Oiwa, so that he would have the grounds for divorce. Takuretsu was so shocked by Oiwa's appearance, he couldn't follow through with the orders. Instead, he told Oiwa of Eamon's plans, and showed Oiwa her own face in the mirror. Seeing her deformed face for the first time, Oiwa was so horrified that she stole Takuretsu's sword, killing herself. With her last breath, she cursed Eamon's name. On the night of Eamon's remarriage to Ome, the ghost of the disfigured Oiwa appeared before him. A terrified and guilty Emon quickly fled from Oiwa, but no matter how far he ran, he couldn't escape her hauntings. After that night, no matter where Emon looked, even in the very lanterns he used to light his path, he would see Oiwa's disfigured face staring back at him. The Hachishaku-sama, the 8-feet-tall woman. A young boy was playing quietly in his grandparents' garden when he heard a mysterious sound in the distance. Paw, 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 paw. He stood at the edge of the garden and looked in the direction of the strange sound. A gigantic figure dressed as a woman was striding towards him. Terrified, the child rushed to his grandparents and told them what he'd seen. As soon as he mentioned the strange sound, his grandparents turned pale and shook their heads. They knew that their grandson had been liked by the Hachishaku-sama. The Hachishaku-sama is a creature that takes the appearance of an extremely tall woman and makes a sound like paw, 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 paw in a deep male voice. It appears slightly differently depending on who sees it. Some say it looks like a haggard old woman in a kimono, and others say it looks like a girl in a white funeral shroud. But one thing that never changes is its height of exactly 8 meters and the sound it makes. Frightened, the boy's grandparents decided to consult a witch. The young boy had to stay locked in his room all night holding a sacred scroll against his body and never, under any circumstance, open his bedroom door until 7 a.m. The boy curled up on his futon, clasped the sacred scroll to his chest, and closed his eyes tightly. He wasn't sure how much time had passed when he heard the voice of his grandmother telling him to unlock the door. The danger, it seemed, had finally passed. But as he opened his eyes, he noticed it was still dark outside. It couldn't be 7 a.m. yet. He told the voice on the other side of the door to go away, and after a moment of silence came the sound. Poh, 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 poh. Finally the sun rose. The boy looked at the scroll he had been clutching all night. It had turned completely black. At that moment he knew the Hachishaku-sama had been defeated. The next day, his mother came to take him home, and as they walked hand in hand through the rice fields, the boy realized they were heading in the opposite direction to where his house was. In fact, his mother was leading him towards the forest. The boy clasped his hands to his ears and let out a ghastly yell. He didn't want to look at his mother, nor hear the horrible sound he knew was about to come out of her mouth. Once, there was an impoverished samurai living in Kyoto with his wife. A wealthy lord from a distant land invited the samurai to be his vassal. Because it was such an honourable opportunity, he had no choice but to accept, leaving his wife to wait in poverty at home until he returned. Years later, having dutifully served his lord, the samurai finally returned to Kyoto. Although his house was in disrepair, his wife was still there to happily welcome him home. Finally, reunited, the two spent the entire night talking and laughing together before drifting off to sleep. When the samurai awoke, the warmth he had just felt the night before from having his arms wrapped around his loving wife was no longer there, and instead he opened his eyes to see that he was only holding a cold skeleton, shrouded in long black hair. The samurai learned that his wife passed away from sadness the summer before, but his skeleton had remained in the house all the while, waiting faithfully for his return. One night, when the owner of a candy shop was about to close, a pale woman entered and asked to buy some candy. He gave her the candy, and the same thing continued for the next 6 days. 7 days later, when he was counting the sales, he realized that one of the coins in the cash register had turned into a leaf usually placed on graves. The shopkeeper suspected that the woman might be the one who gave him the fake money. She came again that night asking for candy, and this time he decided to follow her. To his surprise, she headed towards the cemetery, and after entering, suddenly disappeared into one of the graves. At that exact moment, he heard a baby crying under the ground. Quickly, he began digging with his bare hands at the spot of the baby's cries. He let out a small scream as his bloodied fingernails scraped against the lid of a coffin. Inside, a tiny baby lay crying next to the body of the woman who had already passed away. The shopkeeper realized to his horror that the woman had given birth to the baby after her death and was trying to nurture the baby by buying candy with money made from leaves. There was once a girl, Okiku, who lived in Himeji Castle as a servant of the samurai Aoyama. One of Okiku's tasks was to care for her master's collection of 10 valuable plates. But one day, while Okiku was washing the plates, she realized one was missing. No matter how many times she counted, she always came up one short. Her master was so enraged that she had lost his plate that he threw her down a well. Murdered so brutally, Okiku's soul could not rest. Every night her ghost crawled out from the well to continue counting her master's plates. She would come to count to 9, then, upon realizing that the 10th plate was still gone, she would let out an ear-piercing shriek. Okiku's screams kept everyone in the castle up all night long, for weeks on end, until eventually a Buddhist priest finally appeased her. Sometime in the early 1970s, a young couple was driving up the slopes of the Inunaki Ridge. They were heading for Hisayama on the other side of the mountain, and to get there from where they were, they had to pass a narrow road up the hill. Just before entering Inunaki Tunnel, their car unleashed a grounding sound, and the engine died. They were stranded. However, they noticed a passage on the right side of the road, so they left their car and headed up to the forest to seek help. After a short while, they came across a handwritten sign reading,
"The Constitution of Japan does not apply beyond this point."
The trail, overgrown with thick bush, was becoming more and more difficult to climb, but a few hundred meters further, they suddenly entered a small village. It seemed abandoned, the houses dark and dilapidated, and nobody could be seen. There were no sounds of people or animals, even the wind had calmed. It was dead silent. Growing anxious, they decided to walk back to their car, but something moved inside one of the houses. Suddenly, a man stood on the porch of a dilapidated building not more than 30 meters away.
"Hi there. Welcome to Inunaki Village,"
he shouted. And with just a few steps, he appeared right in front of them.
"We love visitors here. We just don't like it when they leave us again."
With a swift motion of his sickle, he cut down the young boy from his neck to the side of his belly. The young man looked at him astonished before collapsing to the ground. The girl tried to back away, but the old man seized her in an unnaturally firm grip. He lifted her straight up with one hand and threw her down on the graveled street with such brutality she felt her ribs break. When the sickle came down towards her neck, she turned her head towards the closest house, and with horror she saw what she hadn't noticed before. Behind and between the small buildings were decaying corpses of people, all killed by the mad old man with the sickle. Nobody heard from the young couple again. The white car still waits there, now covered with rust, punctured tires parked on the side of the road, right where the small pathway leads into the forest. The Woman of the Snow. A young man in search of his fortune was passing through the snow-covered mountains when he's caught in a sudden snowstorm and loses his way. Nearly frozen to death, he almost gives up hope when a strange woman, covered in frost and with a face as pale as snow, appeared before him, Yuki Onna. Because he was so young, the Yuki Onna took pity on him and guided him to a warm cabin in the woods, saving his life. In exchange for his rescue, however, she made him a promise never to tell anyone of their meeting. Years later, the young man met and married a charming girl named Yuki, and they lived happily together for many years. But one day, the young man told his wife about how he was once saved by the mysterious Yuki Onna, breaking his promise. As he reveals this tale to his wife, her face grew pale and frost began to cover her body. His wife's true identity was the Yuki Onna. The promise broken, she vanished back into the winter's night. One dark night, the samurai Agiwara spotted an elegant woman carrying a peony lantern wandering through the streets of Edo. For Agiwara, it was love at first sight. He invited the beautiful woman Otsuyu to accompany him home, where they talked, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company. That night, Agiwara's neighbor, hearing eerie laughter coming from Agiwara's garden, peeked over the wall. He saw Agiwara holding not a woman, but a laughing skeleton. The next morning, the neighbor revealed to Agiwara what he had seen, and horrified, Agiwara went seeking advice from the priest at the local temple. While waiting for the priest, Agiwara strolled around the small graveyard. To his horror, Agiwara found a grave with Otsuyu's name engraved on the headstone. He realized that the woman he had fallen in love with had died long before they had ever met. And now that he knew the truth, Otsuyu's ghost no longer appeared before him. But Agiwara missed Otsuyu desperately, and after some time he could no longer bear his sadness and returned to the temple where Otsuyu lay buried. At the temple gates, Otsuyu appeared before him once more, reaching out her hand and asking Agiwara to accompany her home. Without hesitation, Agiwara took her hand and walked with her into the darkness. After this final visit to the temple, Agiwara had vanished, and the priest concerned opened Otsuyu's grave. Inside the coffin lay two bodies, Agiwara and Otsuyu, together forever. The Legless Woman. A young Japanese woman named Kashima Reiko was walking home at night. Sadly, she fell victim to a group of assailants. Beaten, raped, and left for dead, the dying woman crawled on the ground to beg for help. Severely weakened, she finally lost consciousness on a train track just as an express train was coming. The train sliced through both her legs. However, instead of dying quickly from her injuries, she was able to crawl with her upper body to the nearby train station. Instead of receiving any aid, she was instead covered with a plastic tarp and forgotten about. She suffered a long, agonizing death. As the legend goes, those who hear the tale of the woman who was hit by the train will supposedly encounter her ghost after 3 days. The ghost, who has no lower body, will persistently pursue the person and is believed to crawl at remarkable speeds of up to 93 miles per hour, making escape nearly impossible, even in a car. Some suggest that the ghost is searching for her lost legs, while others argue her fury towards humanity's disregard for her during her last moments has transformed her into an unforgiving killer. If she catches her prey, the ghost is rumored to tear them in half and take their lower body as her own. The Legend of Peko-chan. Peko-chan is a terrifying Japanese urban legend about the mascot of a company that sells candy called Milky. The company's slogan is, "Milky tastes like mama." Peko-chan's a young girl with big cheeks, pigtails, and a red ribbon in her hair. She's always seen with a smile on her face, licking her lips. A life-size doll can be seen in front of many shops in Japan. According to urban legend, the real story of Peko-chan is actually very disturbing. It is said that Peko-chan was modeled on a young girl called Peko, who died during the Second World War. Peko was 6 years old. She lived with her mother in a small Japanese village. During the war, there was a shortage of food in Japan. Peko and her mother were starving, and there was nothing to eat. They had to drink muddy water in order to survive and gnaw on grass and the roots of trees to stave off hunger. Peko's mother couldn't bear to see her daughter suffering, so one day she took a knife, cut off part of her arm, and offered it to Peko. When Peko took her first bite of human flesh, she couldn't believe how sweet the flesh tasted. She proceeded to kill her mother and eat her entire body. Peko continued the rest of her life as a cannibal. It is said that the reason her tongue is always out is because she is licking her mother's blood off her cheeks. And also, the name of the candy is Milky, but when you rearrange the sounds, it becomes "kill me," her mother's final words. That's why the slogan of the company, when translated from Japanese, is "Milky tastes like mama."